Book 2, Chapter 1 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics discusses four important topics. First, how the virtues relate to nature. Second, how we acquire virtues of character. Third, how we advance and develop virtues of character after we've acquired them. And lastly, why good habits in youth are critical to our moral development. Aristotle begins Chapter 1 talking about the two kinds of virtue, intellectual virtue and virtues of character. Intellectual virtue, he notes, we acquire through teaching and learning. So virtues like wisdom and good judgment come through teaching. The virtues of character, however, he says, are the result of habituation, of forming and practicing good habits. From this, he writes, it is clear that none of the virtues of character arises in us by nature, for nothing natural can be made to behave differently by habituation. For example, a stone that naturally falls downwards could not be made by habituation to rise upwards, not even if one tried to habituate it by throwing it up 10,000 times. Nor can fire be habituated to burn downwards, nor anything else that naturally behaves in one way be habituated to behave differently. So, virtues arise in us neither by nature nor contrary to nature, but nature gives us the capacity to acquire them, and completion comes through habituation. This first paragraph gives us a critical insight that Aristotle has about these virtues of character, including virtues like courage and honesty and justice. We do not have them by nature. We are not naturally honest or courageous, but neither do we have them contrary to nature. We don't have to overcome and conquer our nature in order to force ourselves to be courageous or honest. Rather, nature gives us the capacity to acquire them. So we are, as it were, potentially courageous or potentially honest. And then we complete and activate that potentiality through the practice of good habits. This is really critical to understand the relation between virtue and nature. Virtue is a natural capacity that is perfected by habitual activity. So it's not inherent in us and it's not alien to us. It is an ability that we have that we need to work in order to develop and bring to perfection. Aristotle continues this line of thought in the next paragraph, where he notes that if we have something by nature, we would possess the capacity first, and then only afterwards would we perform the activities that go along with that capacity. And his example of this is the senses. We are able to see and able to hear, but we possess that ability in our eyes and in our ears before we actually go about doing any seeing or hearing. Virtues, he says, are not like that. Virtues, however, we acquire by first exercising them. The same is true with skills, in fact. So virtues are like skills and not like the senses, in that the only way I become courageous is by practicing courageous activities. In the same way, he says, we become builders by building, we become lyre players by playing the lyre. So too we become just by doing just actions. We become temperate by temperate actions and courageous by courageous actions. In the third paragraph of this chapter, Aristotle then turns to the question of how we develop a skill. He says, as in the case of a skill, the origin and means of development of each virtue are the same as those of its corruption. It is from playing the lyre that people become good and bad lyre players. Let me pause there for a moment. How do you become a good lyre player? By playing the lyre well, repeatedly, and developing good habits. How do you become a bad player? By playing badly over and over again and developing and cementing your bad habits. Anybody who's tried to overcome bad habits in physical training or in sports can sympathize, I think, with this point of view and see the insight here. Aristotle continues, and it is analogous in the case of builders and all the rest, since from building well, people will be good builders, from building badly, bad builders. If this were not so, there would have been no need of a person to teach them, but they would have been born good or bad at their skill. So again, the comparison between virtues and skills comes out. Having a moral virtue or a virtue of character like courage or honesty is much more like developing a skill where I have to go out and practice. And if I practice well and do it well, I develop the virtue. If I perform the activities associated with the virtue poorly or badly, I become more and more inaugurated into being a bad version of this. So acting well in relation to a virtue like courage will help me to become more courageous, but acting badly over and over again will cement me in bad practices and cause me to be corrupted in this virtue. The final paragraph of this chapter reads, "It is the same then with the virtues, for by acting as we do in our dealings with other men, some of us become just, others unjust, and by acting as we do in the face of danger, and by becoming habituated to feeling fear and confidence, some of us become courageous, others cowardly. The same goes for cases of appetites and anger. By conducting ourselves in one way or the other in such circumstances, some become temperate and even-tempered, others intemperate or bad-tempered. In a word, then, like states arise from like activities." Let me pause there for a moment and note, what is it that makes the person become just? One person become just and one become unjust. How does one person become courageous and another person become a coward? Well, it's by the way they act in certain circumstances and by the way that they are guided by their instructors or their role models. If I imitate a poor role model, I will become a poor person in terms of my courage. This is why we must give a certain character to our activities, since it is on the differences between them that the resulting states depend. So, it is not unimportant how we are habituated from our early days. Indeed, it makes a huge difference, or rather, all the difference. Note here, Aristotle has turned to a point that we saw Plato make in Republic as well, that the development of our habits in our youth is critically important for how we're going to be able to behave morally as adults. Why is this? It's the character of our activities. It's the way in which we do things, which is going to have the effect, the lasting effect upon our character, turn us into a person who has this animal part of the soul that is oriented toward being courageous or being honest, or towards the opposites, towards habitual cowardice or dishonesty. So, the kind of training that we get of our emotions and our desires from our earliest youth is critically important to our ability to be mature and morally healthy adults. That brings us to the end of Chapter 1. That's all for now. Goodbye.